plasma bolt screamed past Iverthorn's head, so close he could smell the ozone burning through the stale air of the transport bay. He rolled behind a cargo container, the ceramite plates of his flak armor scraping against the deck plating with a metallic shriek. Around him, the firefight raged in a storm of las fire and alien weaponry that painted the dim corridor in strobing colors of red and blue. "Thorn! Left flank's collapsing!" The voice crackled through his vox bead, distorted by interference from the ship's failing power grid. He didn't waste breath responding. Instead, Ivar pivoted from cover, his Laskerbine snapping up to his shoulder with the practiced ease of 4 decades of warfare. The targeting reticle found its mark, a Kroot mercenary scrambling over a barricade, its avian features twisted in a hunting snarl. He squeezed the trigger twice. The first shot punched through the alien's chest. The second was insurance, taking it in the throat as it fell. "Alien!" Ivar barked into the vox. "Get those wounded to Bay 7. We're pulling back to the reactor level." "Negative on that, veteran." Commander Ilian Kor's voice was steady despite the chaos. "Reactor's been compromised. Engineering reports chaos corruption spreading through the coolant systems." Of course it was. Because this day couldn't possibly get worse. The transport ship, Righteous Endeavor, had been 3 days from making warp translation to the Damocles Gulf. When they'd been ambushed by a combined force that shouldn't exist, Tau auxiliaries, fighting alongside what appeared to be renegade cultists, bearing the marks of the ruinous powers. It was a nightmare scenario that violated every tactical doctrine Ivar had learned in his long career with the Cadian 8th Regiment. Now they were boarded, outgunned, and running out of time. "All units, this is Thorn." He switched to company-wide vox as he moved, years of experience guiding his feet even as his eyes scanned for threats. "Fighting retreat to the tertiary hangar. We're getting off this ship before it tears itself apart or those heretics summon something worse." A figure emerged from the smoke ahead. Not human, not Tau, not anything Ivar immediately recognized. It stood perhaps 7 feet tall, its form obscured by flowing robes that seemed to shift between colors that hurt to look at directly. When it spoke, its voice layered over itself in discordant harmony. "Abandon your struggle, human. This vessel belongs to powers beyond your comprehension." Ivar's response was to put 3 last bolts through its center mass. The thing staggered but didn't fall, its robes rippling as if absorbing the energy. It raised one elongated hand, and reality began to warp around its fingers. Then Ilian was there, moving with the augmented speed of his cybernetic legs. The commander's power sword ignited with a crack of discharging energy, and he brought it down in a 2-handed strike that would have cleaved a space marine. The blessed blade met the creature's flesh and burned through it like paper. The thing's scream was a sound that existed in too many dimensions, and when it died, it collapsed into ash and a smell like burning funeral pyres. "Thought you said pull back," Ilian said, his scarred face split in a grim smile as he fell into step beside Ivar. "New plan. We're going up." "Up?" "Veteran, in case you haven't noticed, we're in the middle of a ship that's falling apart, which is why we're taking one of their assault shuttles. Saw a boarding craft stuck in the upper hangar when we passed through." Ilian's augmented eyes whirred as they focused. "That's Tau tech. You even know how to fly those things?" "No, but I know someone who might." They found Draketh exactly where Ivar expected, in the converted storage bay that had served as the ship's xenology lab before everything went to hell. The Tau scientist was frantically downloading data from corrupted cogitator banks, his 3-fingered hands moving across hololithic displays with desperate efficiency. "We don't have time for this," Ivar said, his Laskerbine trained on the alien but not quite aimed at him. Their alliance had been one of necessity since the boarding began, but trust remained a fragile thing. Draketh's head turned, his eyes wide in his smooth blue face. "I am attempting to preserve critical data. The research on these warp anomalies could get us all killed if you don't move right now." Ivar gestured with his weapon toward the door. "We're commandeering a Tau shuttle. You're going to fly it." For a long moment, the scientist simply stared. Then understanding bloomed across his alien features. "The boarding craft in Hangar Prime. Yes, it could work. But the hangar will be heavily defended. Which is why we're bringing friends." Ilian was already on the Vox, rallying what remained of their company. 37 souls out of the 300 who'd been aboard when the attack began. Imperial guardsmen, tech priests, a handful of ship crew, and one very confused Tau scientist. It would have to be enough. The journey to Hangar Prime was a running battle through corridors that seemed to shift and writhe with corruption. The ship's machine spirits were dying, and something far worse was being born in their place. Walls wept ichor that hissed when last fire touched it. Shadows moved, independently of light sources. Twice they had to backtrack when passages simply ceased to exist, replaced by solid bulkheads where doors had been moments before. Ivar had seen chaos corruption before, on Cadia during the 13th Black Crusade. He'd watched entire cities fold into the warp. But this was different. This was targeted, intelligent, and worst of all, it was coordinated with the conventional assault. Someone or something was orchestrating this madness. The hangar doors stood sealed, a massive blast door that would normally require authentication codes and override protocols. Ilian solved the problem with a melta charge placed against the locking mechanism. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space, but it blew the door inward with a shower of molten metal. Beyond lay chaos in its most literal sense. The hangar had become a war zone within a war zone. Tau Fire warriors fought desperately against creatures that shouldn't exist, twisted. Amalgamations of flesh and metal that screamed prayers to dark gods between bursts of corrupted weaponry. In the center of it all, the assault shuttle sat like an island of sanity, its smooth lines and clean technology a stark contrast to the madness surrounding it. "Cover formation," Ivar's voice cut through the din. "Get Draketh to that shuttle." His soldiers moved with the discipline that separated the Imperial Guard from rabble. They'd lost their ship, their mission, and most of their comrades, but they hadn't lost their training or their faith. Las fire erupted in controlled bursts, each shot placed with deadly precision. The corrupted cultists fell in droves, their mutated bodies offering little protection against military-grade weaponry. But the numbers were against them. For every enemy that fell, 2 more seemed to emerge from the shadows. Ivar watched his soldiers fall one by one. Guardsman Octavius taking a plasma bolt to the chest, Trooper Garen cut. Down by a creature with too many arms, Scout Lissa crushed beneath falling debris. Then reality tore. It began as a shimmer in the air, like heat distortion, but quickly expanded into a rent in space itself. Through it, Ivar could see impossible geometries, colors that existed outside normal spectrums, and shapes that made his eyes water to behold. Something was coming through, something vast and terrible that made the cultists and twisted warriors seem like insects by comparison. "Thorn!" Ilian's voice was tight with controlled fear. "Demon manifestation. We need to move now." But Ivar wasn't looking at the tear in reality. He was looking at the shuttle, where Draketh had just disappeared inside. He was looking at his soldiers, 23 now, fighting and dying to give them all a chance. He was looking at the crates of melta charges, still stacked near the hangar wall, military ordnance that had been waiting for deployment before the attack. An idea, formed terrible and beautiful in its simplicity. "New plan," he said, his voice eerily calm. "Ilian, get everyone to the shuttle. Start the launch sequence. And you? I'm buying time." Understanding dawned in the commander's augmented eyes. "Thorn, that's a death sentence." "It's a necessary action." Ivar ejected his Laskerbine's power pack and slapped in a fresh one. "The Emperor protects, Ilian. Make sure my death means something." For a heartbeat, Ilian looked like he might argue. Then he nodded once, sharp and military, and began barking orders. The remaining guardsmen broke for the shuttle, laying down suppressing fire as they moved. Ivar waited until the last of them were aboard before turning his attention to the melta charges. The first crate was heavy, but adrenaline and 40 years of war had kept him stronger than his age suggested. He dragged it toward the center of the hangar, positioning it between the shuttle and the growing warp tear. The second crate joined it, then the third. The demon was emerging now, its form too complex to fully perceive. What Ivar could see was nightmare made flesh, writhing tentacles of pure malice, eyes that burned with hate older than stars, a mouth that spoke in languages that made blood run from his ears. "Mortal insect," it said, its voice the sound of civilization's dying. "You think your primitive weapons can harm me?" Ivar didn't answer with words. Instead, he set the timers on all 3. Crates to 30 seconds, activated them, and sprinted for the shuttle. Behind him, the demon laughed, a sound that echoed in dimensions he couldn't perceive. 25 seconds. His legs pumped, ceramite boots hammering against deck plating. 20 seconds. The shuttle's ramp was rising, Ilian screaming at him to move faster. 15 seconds. The demon reached for him, reality bending around its grasp. 10 seconds. He dove, his body sailing through the narrowing gap in the ramp. 5 seconds. The ramp sealed with a pneumatic hiss. 0. The melta charges detonated simultaneously, releasing enough thermal energy to vaporize everything within a 50-meter radius. The hangar blast doors, already damaged, buckled and tore away. The sudden decompression was like the fist of an angry god, sucking everything not secured into the void of space, including the demon. Its scream of rage and pain lasted exactly as long as it took for the void to silence it, which is to say, not long at all. Draketh had the shuttle's engines hot. The craft lurched forward, fighting against the explosive decompression, its anti-gravity drive screaming in protest. For one terrible moment, Ivar thought they wouldn't make it. Then they were through, shooting out into the black with the dying, righteous Endeavor spinning behind them, breaking apart like a child's toy. In the pilot's seat, Draketh's hands danced across controls with the confidence of familiarity. "I've set a course for the nearest Imperial outpost. We should reach it in approximately 6 cycles, assuming the warp remains stable. Ivar pulled himself to his feet, every muscle screaming in protest. Around him, his soldiers, his remaining soldiers, were doing the same. 23 souls out of 300. The math was brutal, but they were alive. "Good flying," he said to the Tau, and meant it. Draketh's response was hesitant. "I must ask something. In the hangar, when the demon manifested, you did not hesitate. You knew the charges would kill you if you miscalculated by even a second, yet you acted without fear." "It wasn't without fear," Ivar corrected, settling into a crash seat and beginning the process of field stripping his Laskerbine for maintenance. "Old habits die hard. Fear is always there. You just don't let it control you." "But how? My people, we face death with logic, with calculation of acceptable risk and statistical probability. But you humans, you face death with something else, something I do not understand." The alien's voice carried genuine curiosity, not judgment. "On your world, Earth, the legendary cradle of humanity that none of my kind have seen, what is it you believe that gives you such strength?" The question hung in the air. Around the cramped shuttle compartment, the other survivors had gone quiet, listening. Even Ilian had paused in treating a wounded trooper to hear what Ivar would say. The veteran was quiet for a long moment, his hands moving automatically through the familiar motions of cleaning his weapon. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, but carried through the silence. "You want to know about Earth's religion? About what we believe?" He looked up, his eyes meeting those of the alien scientist. "Then sit down, because this is going to take a while." Draketh settled into a crash seat across from the veteran, his posture attentive. Around them, the other survivors listened with varying degrees of interest, some because they'd never heard Ivar speak at length about anything, others because it was something to focus on, besides their wounds and losses. "Faith," Ivar began, his voice taking on a cadence that suggested he was choosing his words carefully. "Steel, the Emperor's will. You heard me say those words when we made our stand in the hangar. They're not just words. They're the foundation of everything humanity has become. But which came first?" Draketh asked. "The faith in your Emperor, the reliance on steel and technology, or the concept of will? You're thinking about it wrong." Ivar set aside his Laskerbine, satisfied with its condition, and leaned forward. "They're not separate things. They're not even sequential. They're the same thing, expressed 3 different ways." He held up one scarred hand, and in the dim light of the shuttle, the survivors could see the calluses, the burn marks, the places where flesh had been torn and healed countless times. "This hand has held a weapon for 43 years. Started when I was 17, fresh off the agri world of Cadia Prime, thinking I was going to be a hero." A bitter smile crossed his weathered face. "Learned real quick that war isn't about heroes. It's about survival, and the will to keep fighting when every rational bone in your body is screaming at you to run." "Then why not run?" Draketh leaned forward. "Why not calculate the probability of survival and act accordingly? Because calculation doesn't account for faith." Ivar's eyes grew distant, seeing something beyond the shuttle's walls. "Let me tell you about my first real battle. Not some training exercise or parade ground drill. A real battle where people die and the ground runs red with blood." The shuttle hummed around them, carrying them through the void towards safety that seemed impossibly distant. "We were deployed to the hive world of Mordia, responding to an orc wah that had erupted from the underhive. I was a private then, fresh-faced and stupid, armed with a laser gun that I barely knew how to maintain. Our company, 200 strong, was ordered to hold a manufacturing district until reinforcements arrived. The orcs came in a green tide that blotted out the sky, thousands of them roaring and shooting and reveling in the violence. They were bigger than us, stronger than us, had more guns and more numbers. By every calculation, we should have broken. And run within the first hour." Draketh nodded slowly. "And yet you did not." "No, we did not." Ivar's voice hardened. "Do you know why? Because of Sergeant Tybalt. Old bastard was 73 years old, had fought in more campaigns than I'd had hot meals. When the orcs came crashing through our lines, when boys to my left and right started breaking, when I could feel my own legs preparing to run, he stood there like a statue and said 4 words. The veteran paused, and in that moment, every survivor in the shuttle was transported back to their own first battle, their own moment of terror and decision. "The Emperor protects," Ivar said softly. 4 words, that's all. And somehow, those 4 words were enough. Not because we believed they'd make us bulletproof or that the Emperor would send down angels to save us, but because they reminded us that we were part of something bigger than ourselves, that our deaths, if we died, would mean something, that we were standing in the gap between the Imperium and annihilation, and someone had to stand there. "Faith?" Ilian murmured from where he sat. His augmented voice gave the word a strange resonance. "Faith," Ivar agreed, "but not blind faith." Not the kind of faith that makes you stupid or reckless. The kind of faith that gives you the courage to do what needs doing even when you're terrified. He stood, moving to the shuttle's small viewport to stare out at the stars streaming past. On Earth, Old Terra, as we call it now, they had 1,000 different religions before the Emperor united humanity. Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, and countless others. Each one had its own understanding of the divine, its own path to enlightenment or salvation. But you know what they all had in common? Draketh shook his head. They all recognized that there was something greater than the individual, something worth living for, worth dying for, worth fighting for, even when victory seemed impossible. Ivar turned back to face the Tau. When the Emperor walked among humanity, when he led us out of old night and into the stars, he didn't destroy those faiths. He became them. He became the embodiment of everything humans had always believed in: strength, wisdom, protection, purpose. That seems problematic, Draketh said carefully, to conflate so many different beliefs into worship of a single being. Maybe, Ivar shrugged, but it works, because the Emperor isn't just a man who sat on a throne 30,000 years ago. He's an idea. He's the promise that humanity matters, that we're not just meat for the grinder of an uncaring universe, that our struggles, our pain, our brief lives have meaning. One of the wounded guardsmen spoke up, his voice weak but steady. My grandfather told me that on Old Terra there was a religion that believed their God died for their sins, that he suffered so they wouldn't have to. The Christians, Ivar nodded. Yes. And now we believe in an emperor who suffers eternally on the golden throne, keeping the darkness at bay with his will alone. Same concept, different scale. But it's not just faith, Ilian interjected. If it was just faith, we'd be no different from the cultists we just fought, the ones who believed their dark gods would save them. Exactly. Ivar pointed at the commander. That's where steel comes in. He picked up his Laskerbine again, holding it almost reverently. This weapon is more than just a tool. It's a symbol. It represents humanity's second greatest strength, our ability to build, to create, to take the raw materials of the universe and forge them into something useful. Any race can build weapons, Draketh observed, but not like humans do. Ivar's smile was sharp. Your people, the Tau, you build weapons based on logic and efficiency. Every design is optimized. Every component serves a specific purpose. It's impressive, truly. But you know what makes human weapons different? The Tau waited, genuinely curious. We build them to last forever. Ivar ran his hand along the Laskerbine's stock, worn smooth by decades of use. This weapon is older than I am. It was carried by my father in the Macarian Crusades. Before that, it belonged to his mother, who fought in the Gothic War. The design itself dates back 10,000 years to the Great Crusade when the Emperor walked among us. And you know what? It still works, every single time. He looked around at the other guardsmen, each clutching their own weapons. Laser guns, las pistols, a few precious bolt pistols, and in one case, a well-maintained chainsword. We don't just make weapons, we make heirlooms. We make tools that our children's children will carry into battle, that will outlast empires and civilizations. Because we understand that this isn't just about us. It's about the future. It's about ensuring that humanity survives long enough to see tomorrow. But surely, Draketh pressed, this is inefficient. My people iterate constantly, improving designs, adapting to new threats. Your standard template construct technology is 10 millennia old. How can you compete? Ivar's laugh was short and harsh. How do we compete? We're still here. Humanity has faced orc invasions, chaos incursions, Tyranid hive fleets, Necron awakening, and a dozen other extinction-level threats. We've watched civilizations rise and fall. We've seen empires that made the Tau look like infants collapse into dust. And we're still here, still fighting, still holding the line. He tapped the Laskerbine. This is why. Not because it's the best weapon ever made, not because it's more advanced than your pulse rifles or more powerful than an orc slugga, but because it's reliable. Because when everything else fails, when the tech priests can't fix the fancy gear and the cogitators are corrupted and the ammunition runs out, a guardsman with a laser gun can still make a difference. Steel is faith made tangible, Ilian added. It's the proof that we can shape the galaxy to our will. And will, Ivar said, his voice dropping to something almost reverent, is the third pillar, the most important pillar maybe. He turned back to the viewport, watching the stars. I've fought alongside space marines, those transhuman warriors who can break tanks with their bare hands. I've seen them charge into battles that would make demons hesitate. And you know what they all have in common, from the noblest ultramarine to the most feral space wolf? Their genetic engineering, Draketh guessed. Their will. Ivar shook his head. The gene seed, the armor, the weapons, those are just tools. What makes a space marine terrifying isn't his strength or his armor. It's his absolute, unshakable will to achieve his objective. He will not stop. He will not falter. He will not surrender. Not because he's programmed that way, but because he has chosen not to. The veteran turned back to face the survivors. That's what the Emperor gave us. Not superpowers or magic or divine intervention. He gave us the example of an unbreakable will. He showed us that if you refuse to give up, if you keep fighting long after logic says you should stop, if you push past fear and pain and despair, you can achieve the impossible. But at what cost? The Tau's voice was soft. I watched you in that hangar. You were ready to die. You accepted it as inevitable. I was ready to die if necessary, Ivar corrected. There's a difference. I wasn't seeking death. I was seeking victory, and if death was the price, I was willing to pay it. But I'm still here, aren't I? Through luck. Through will. Ivar's eyes were hard. I willed myself to survive long enough to set those charges. I willed myself to move fast enough to reach the shuttle. I willed the Emperor's protection to be upon us, and it was. Maybe you call that luck. Maybe you call it probability. I call it faith, steel, and will, all working together. The shuttle fell silent for a moment. Then one of the younger guardsmen, barely out of his teens, spoke up hesitantly. Sir, I heard the Tau don't believe in gods. Is that true? Draketh nodded. The concept of deities is foreign to us. We believe in the greater good, a philosophy of cooperation and progress that serves the collective benefit of all sentient species. Doesn't that get lonely? The young guardsman's voice was genuinely curious, not mocking. Not having something bigger to believe in? We have our purpose, Draketh said. We have our society, our advancement, our vision for the future. But do you have hope? Ivar asked quietly. When everything is going wrong, when the calculations say you're going to die, when logic and reason offer no solution, do you have hope that somehow, against all odds, you'll make it through? The Tau was quiet for a long moment. No, he finally admitted. In such situations, we would calculate the probability of success and act accordingly. If the probability drops below acceptable parameters, we withdraw and reassess. And that's why humanity survives where others fail. Ivar settled back into his seat. Because we don't withdraw. We can't. It's not in us. We've been fighting for our existence since the moment our ancestors climbed down from the trees and realized the universe was full of things that wanted to eat them. 10,000 generations of refusing to quit. That's what we bring to the galaxy. It sounds exhausting, Draketh said. It is. Ivar's smile was tired but genuine. It's absolutely exhausting. The Imperium demands everything from its citizens, their labor, their loyalty, their lives. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, and we're all soldiers in a fight that never ends. Then why continue? Because someone has to. The veteran's voice was firm. Because if humanity falls, who will hold the line? The Eldar? Too busy mourning their lost empire? The Orcs? They only care about fighting. The Tau? You're young, ambitious, but you don't understand the true horrors of the galaxy yet? The things that lurk in the dark, the entities that would devour all reality if given the chance. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. Humanity is the shield. We've taken it upon ourselves to be the bulwark. Against chaos, the defenders of reality itself. Not because we're the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced, but because we refuse to let the darkness win. Faith that we serve a purpose greater than ourselves. Ilian counted off on his augmented fingers. Steel to give that faith physical form. Will to never surrender. Never give up, never stop fighting. Together, Ivar finished, they make us what we are. They make us human. The shuttle hummed through the void, carrying its cargo of survivors toward safety. Outside, the wreckage of the righteous endeavor had long since disappeared, lost among the countless stars. But inside, something had changed. The survivors sat a little straighter, their eyes held a little more focus. They'd been reminded of why they fought, why they bled, why they died. Not for the glory, not for conquest. Not even really for the Emperor, not as a distant god on a golden throne. They fought because it was right, because someone had to stand between civilization and annihilation, because they were human and humanity didn't know how to quit. 3 cycles later, the stolen shuttle approached the Imperial outpost on Vigilus Secundus. The massive orbital station loomed before them, bristling with weapons batteries and sensor arrays, a fortress in the void that could withstand the assault of an entire fleet. Draketh had been quietly efficient during the journey, maintaining the shuttle's systems and plotting the safest course through the warp-tainted space. But as they drew closer to the station, his movements became increasingly agitated. I should perhaps remain aboard the shuttle when we dock, he said hesitantly. Ivar looked up from where he'd been reviewing casualty reports. A grim task, but someone had to do it. Why? I am Tau. This is an Imperial station. The reception will not be friendly. You saved all our lives, Elian said flatly. Without you, we'd be dead in the void, or worse, absorbed into whatever chaos, abomination was growing on the Endeavor. You'll receive full protection under my authority. With respect, Commander, your authority may not extend to preventing my immediate execution as a Xenos collaborator. He wasn't wrong. The Imperium's xenophobia was infamous, and with good reason. Too many alien species had proven themselves enemies of humanity. But Ivar found himself bothered by the scientist's very real fear. Tell me something. The veteran said, Why did you help us? When the boarding began, you could have tried to escape on your own, could have hidden and waited for Tau forces to arrive. Instead, you fought alongside us. Why? Draketh's shoulders, if they could be called shoulders, slumped slightly. Because it was the right thing to do. Because those cultists and their demonic allies were an affront to logic and order. Because, he paused, seeming to search for words, because you and your soldiers reminded me that there are some things worth fighting for, even when the probability of success is low. Ivar and Ilian exchanged a look. The commander's scarred face was unreadable, but Ivar could see the calculation happening behind his augmented eyes. When we dock, Ilian said finally, you stay close to us. Anyone asks, you're under my personal authority as a strategic asset and witness to chaos activity. That should buy us time to sort this out properly. You would risk censure for me? I would risk censure for someone who exemplifies what the greater good could be, Ivar said. You talk about cooperation between species. Well, here's your chance to prove it can work. The docking procedure was tense. Imperial Navy security teams swarmed the shuttle the moment it clamped to the docking umbilical, weapons raised and targeting reticles dancing across every surface. But when Ilian emerged first, his commander's insignia visible and his augmented voice carrying authority, the tension dropped a few critical degrees. Commander Ilian Kor, Cadian 8th Regiment, serial number 447 Beta Zeta. I'm the ranking survivor from the transport ship Righteous Endeavor, which was lost to combined Chaos and Xenos forces approximately 3 cycles ago. We have wounded requiring immediate medical attention, critical intelligence regarding Chaos activity in this sector, and 1 Xenos prisoner who has proven invaluable to our survival. Prisoner, not ally, not friend. The word choice was deliberate, and Ivar saw Draketh flinch slightly at the designation. But it was the politically safe choice, the one that would keep the scientist alive long enough to sort out his status properly. The security teams fell back, allowing medical teams to rush forward. The wounded guardsmen were loaded onto gurneys with practiced efficiency, their injuries assessed and treated on the spot. Ivar watched it all with the detached focus of someone who'd seen this dance 100 times before. Then a new figure appeared, striding down the umbilical with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. She wore the black uniform of a naval officer, her rank insignia marking her as a captain. Her face was weathered by age and void service, and her eyes were the cold gray of someone who'd made hard decisions and lived with them. Commander Kor, she said, her voice clipped and efficient. Captain Zephin Vale, master of this station, your report. Ilian snapped off a crisp salute. Captain, we were aboard the Righteous Endeavor en route to the Damocles Gulf when we were ambushed by a combined force of Tau auxiliaries and what appeared to be renegade cultists bearing marks of Chaos worship. The ship was boarded, and we observed active demonic manifestation before we commandeered an enemy shuttle and escaped. Captain Vale's eyes narrowed. Tau and Chaos working together? That's, well, unprecedented. With respect, Captain, that's why we need to brief your intelligence staff immediately. This could indicate a larger threat. Ilian gestured back toward the shuttle. We also have a Tau scientist who witnessed the entire engagement and possesses technical knowledge that may be relevant to understanding the enemy's capabilities. Vale's gaze flicked past Ilian to where Draketh stood, flanked by 2 guardsmen with weapons ready but not quite aimed. Her expression was unreadable. Bring him to interrogation chamber 7. Full security protocols. Captain, Commander, I understand your desire to protect someone who helped you survive. But protocol exists for a reason. The Xenos will be treated fairly, but he will be interrogated. If his information proves valuable and his intentions genuine, we'll discuss his status afterward. Until then, he's a prisoner of war. Ilian looked like he wanted to argue, but military discipline won out. He nodded stiffly. Understood, Captain. As the security team moved to take custody of Draketh, Ivar stepped forward. Captain Vale, request permission to observe the interrogation. I spent the last 3 cycles in close quarters with the prisoner. I may be able to provide context for his responses. Vale studied him for a moment. Name and rank, soldier. Veteran Sergeant Ivor Thorne, Cadian 8th Regiment. Cadian? Something flickered in Vale's eyes. Respect, maybe, or recognition. I served with the 7th during the Medusa File campaign. Good people. She nodded. Permission granted, Sergeant. Report to the interrogation chamber in 1 hour. Dismissed? The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Ivar submitted to a medical examination that pronounced him fit for duty, despite various bruises and minor wounds. He filed an initial after-action report, knowing a much more detailed one would be required later. He checked on his surviving soldiers, making sure each of them was receiving proper care. And he thought about faith, steel, and will. The interrogation chamber was exactly what Ivar expected. A sterile room divided by reinforced glass, monitoring equipment lining the walls, a table and chairs bolted to the floor on both sides. Dryketh sat on the far side, looking small and vulnerable despite his height. An inquisitorial agent stood beside him, her face hidden behind a metal mask, her hands resting on weapons that could probably kill in a dozen different ways. Captain Vale occupied the interrogator's seat, a data slate in front of her displaying information Ivar couldn't see from where he stood in the observation chamber. Ilian stood beside him, his augmented eyes watching every detail. "Let's begin," Vale said, her voice carrying through the audio system. "State your name, rank, and unit designation." "My name is Draketh. I am a Porvre, roughly equivalent to your rank of scientist, assigned to the Watercast Research Division investigating warp phenomena. I have no unit designation as humans would understand it. And how did you come to be aboard an Imperial transport vessel?" "I was captured during an engagement in the Damocles Gulf 6 months ago. The transport was carrying me to a different facility for further interrogation when we were attacked." Vale's expression didn't change. "Captured. So, you're an enemy combatant." "I am a scientist who was in the wrong place at the wrong time," Draketh corrected gently. "I did not fire a weapon. I did not resist capture. I was conducting research on warp eddies near the front line when my shuttle was caught in a battle between Imperial and Tau forces." "Research on the warp?" Vale leaned forward. "Why would the Tau, who claim to have no connection to the warp, be researching it?" "Because ignorance is dangerous." The Tau's voice was firm. "Your species and the warp are intrinsically linked. Understanding that connection is crucial to understanding how to defend against the threats that emerge from it. Like the demon we encountered on the Endeavor," Ivar interjected through the observation room's comms. "Draketh's research may have been what attracted the Chaos forces in the first place." Vale's head turned slightly, acknowledging the point. "Explain." Draketh shifted in his seat. "For several months, I've been tracking unusual patterns in warp disturbances across this sector. Coordinated patterns that suggest intelligence and purpose. When the Endeavor was attacked, I was able to analyze the warp signatures of the cultists and their demonic allies. Captain, what I found was disturbing." "Disturbing how?" "The Chaos corruption wasn't random. It was surgical, targeted. Someone or something was guiding it with precision that shouldn't be possible. The warp is chaotic by nature, yet this manifestation showed control that rivaled any military operation." "You're saying the forces of Chaos have learned to operate with tactical precision?" Vale's voice remained level, but Ivar could hear the concern underneath. "More than that. I'm saying that the attack on your ship was a test. The combination of Tau auxiliaries providing conventional firepower, while Chaos entities corrupted the ship's systems and manifested demons. It was a proof of concept. Someone is learning how to coordinate multiple threat vectors into a unified assault." The room fell silent. Ivar felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the station's climate control. "If what you're saying is true," Vale said slowly, "then we're facing a threat unlike anything the Imperium has encountered before. An enemy that combines the technological sophistication of the Tau with the reality-warping powers of Chaos." "Precisely." Draketh leaned forward as much as his restraints would allow. "And that is why I helped the survivors escape. Because whatever is happening here threatens all sentient life. The greater good, the Imperium, even the minor Xeno species. None of us can stand alone against this." "Pretty words," the inquisitorial agent said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was mechanical, filtered through her mask. "But how do we know you're not part of this threat? How do we know this isn't just Tau manipulation?" "You don't." Draketh's answer was simple. "You have no reason to trust me, but consider this. I could have died on that transport. I could have sabotaged the shuttle during our escape. I could have led you to Tau space instead of an Imperial outpost. I did none of those things. Because unlike what your propaganda suggests, not all Xenos are your enemies. Some of us are simply trying to survive in a galaxy that wants us all dead." Ivar found himself nodding. It was a good argument, and more importantly, it felt true. He'd watched Draketh during the escape, seen the genuine fear and determination in the alien's eyes. This wasn't an enemy. This was someone caught up in events beyond his control, trying to do the right thing. "Captain Vale," Ivar spoke up, "request permission to share something." Vale glanced at the observation room. "Granted." Ivar took a breath. "During our journey here, Draketh asked me about Earth's religion, about what humans believe. And I told him about faith, steel, and will. About how humanity survives not because we're the strongest or the smartest, but because we refuse to give up. Because we believe in something greater than ourselves. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. But as I was speaking, I realized something. Those three pillars, faith, steel, will, they're not unique to humanity. They're universal truths. Any species that wants to survive in this galaxy needs all three. Faith that their existence has purpose. Steel to defend that existence. And the will to never surrender. Your point, Sergeant? Vale's tone was neutral, but attentive. My point is that Draketh has demonstrated all three. He has faith in his greater good, steel in the form of his knowledge and skills, and the will to do what's right, even when it costs him everything. Maybe the specific beliefs are different, maybe the methods are different, but the fundamentals are the same. And if we can't recognize that, if we can't find a way to work with someone like him, then how are we any different from the chaos forces that want to destroy us all? The room was silent. Ivar could feel Ilian's augmented eyes on him, measuring, calculating. Could feel Captain Vale's weighing his words against decades of Imperial doctrine. Could feel the inquisitorial agent's scrutiny like a physical pressure. Then Vale spoke. Sergeant Thorne, are you suggesting we should ally with Xenos against the Imperium's enemies? I'm suggesting, Ivar said carefully, that we should be smart enough to recognize when someone is trying to help us, regardless of what species they are. The Emperor taught us to be strong, to be vigilant, to never surrender. But he also taught us to be wise, to adapt, to use every tool at our disposal to ensure humanity's survival. Dangerous thoughts, Sergeant. The inquisitorial agent's mechanical voice carried a warning. Maybe. Ivar met the masked figure's gaze without flinching. But I'd rather be dangerous and alive than pure and dead, and I think the Emperor would agree. Captain Vale stood, the scraping of her chair loud in the sudden silence. She walked to the reinforced glass, studying Draketh with an intensity that made the Tau visibly uncomfortable. Borvre Draketh, she said finally, you will remain in custody pending further investigation. However, in recognition of your assistance to Imperial forces and the intelligence you've provided, you will be treated as a guest rather than a prisoner. Comfortable quarters, access to our library databases, and the opportunity to continue your research under supervision. Draketh's posture relaxed slightly. Thank you, Captain. That is more than I expected. Don't thank me yet. Vale's smile was thin. If your intelligence proves accurate, you'll be working closely with our strategic division to help us understand this new threat. If it proves false or misleading, the Inquisition will have questions. Very pointed questions. Understood. Vale turned to face the observation room. Sergeant Thorne, Commander Corps, you're both to report to my office in 2 hours for a full debrief. Bring any additional data or observations you gathered during the attack. Dismissed. 2 hours later, Ivar stood in Captain Vale's office, a space that managed to be both austere and comfortable. The walls were lined with commendations and battle honors from campaigns stretching back decades. A viewport showed the orbital station's curved horizon and the planet below, a world of browns and grays that spoke of heavy industry and minimal habitability. Ilian stood beside him, ramrod straight despite the long hours since their escape. Captain Vale sat behind her desk, reviewing data on multiple screens that floated in hololithic displays. The inquisitorial agent, who had introduced herself simply as Agent Lissa, stood in the corner like a statue. I've reviewed your reports, Vale said without preamble, and I've cross-referenced them with intelligence from other sectors. The picture that emerges is troubling. She gestured, and the hololithic displays reconfigured to show a star map of the region. Red markers indicated known chaos activity. Blue markers showed Tau expansion, and in several locations, red and blue markers overlapped. 3 months ago, we dismissed these as statistical anomalies. Chaos cultists operating in Tau space, possibly attempting to corrupt their empire from within. But now, with your report, we see a pattern. These aren't random occurrences. This is coordination. Someone is building an army, Ilian said quietly. Not just an army, an alliance. Vale's voice was grim. The question is, who? What force could possibly unite two ideologies as opposed as the greater good and the chaos gods? Perhaps it's not about ideology at all, Ivar suggested. Perhaps it's about pragmatism. The Tau have technology and organization. Chaos has reality-warping power and endless hordes of the damned. Together, they'd be nearly unstoppable. But the Tau hate chaos, Agent Lissa interjected. Their entire philosophy rejects the supernatural and the irrational. How could they possibly work with demons? Maybe they don't know they are, Ilian offered. What if the chaos elements are infiltrating Tau auxiliary forces without the Firecast's knowledge? Using human or other Xenos auxiliaries as vessels for corruption? Vale nodded slowly. That would explain the pattern. Rogue auxiliaries acting outside Tau command structure, coordinating with Chaos forces through methods the Tau don't understand or can't detect. And it means the Tau themselves aren't the primary threat, Ivar added, which is why Draketh's cooperation is so important. He can help us understand how the Tau think, how they operate, where they're vulnerable to this kind of infiltration. You trust him? It wasn't a question. Agent Lyssa's masked face turned toward Ivar. I trust what I saw, Ivar replied. A scientist who could have abandoned us, but didn't. Who risked his life to save humans he barely knew? Who chose cooperation over self-preservation? Yes, I trust him. As much as I trust anyone these days. Vale drummed her fingers on the desk, a rhythmic tapping that spoke of deep thought. Sergeant Thorne, you've given me a lot to think about. Your unorthodox approach to this Xenos. She paused. To Draketh may prove either brilliant or disastrous. Time will tell. Captain, with respect, we don't have time. Ivar stepped forward. If our analysis is correct, if someone is building a hybrid force of Tau technology and Chaos corruption, they won't stop with one ship. They'll escalate. More attacks, more coordination, more audacious operations. We need to act now. Act how? Vale's eyes were sharp. We're one orbital station with limited resources. The nearest Imperial fleet is weeks away. What exactly do you propose? Ivar had been thinking about this question for the past 2 hours, letting the pieces fall into place in his mind. Now, standing in this office with authority figures who could make things happen, he felt the weight of what he was about to suggest. We hunt them, he said simply. We don't wait for them to come to us. We take the fight to them. Ilian turned to look at him, augmented eyes whirring. Elaborate. The Endeavor was attacked for a reason. They wanted something on that ship. Maybe Draketh's research, maybe something else. But they chose that target specifically, which means they're operating with intelligence and planning. And if they're planning, they're coordinating from somewhere. A command center, Agent Lyssa said softly. A base of operations where Tau and Chaos elements can meet and coordinate without being detected by either empire. Exactly. Ivar moved to the star map, studying the pattern of attacks. Look at the distribution. These incidents form a rough circle, all within 2 weeks' travel of this central region. He pointed to a cluster of uncharted systems on the map's edge. Somewhere in there, that's where they are. Vale leaned forward, her expression intent. That's wild space. Uncharted, unmapped, dangerous. No one goes there because there's nothing worth finding. Which makes it the perfect hiding place, Ilian countered. No Imperial patrols, no Tau expansion, no monitoring. Just empty systems where anything could be happening. This is speculation, Vale said, but her tone suggested she was already convinced. We have no proof. Then we find proof, Ivar said. We take a ship, a small crew, and we investigate. If we find nothing, we've lost a few weeks. If we find what I think we'll find... He trailed off, letting the implications speak for themselves. The room fell silent. Ivar could see the calculations happening behind Vale's eyes, the weighing of a risk against potential reward. Could see Agent Lyssa's posture shift slightly, indicating interest, despite her mask's immobility. Could see Ilian's augmented fingers tapping against his leg, already planning logistics and force composition. Finally, Vale spoke. If I authorize this, and that's a very big if, who would lead the mission? I would, Ivar and Ilian said simultaneously. They looked at each other, and despite the tension, Ivar felt a smile tug at his lips. We both would, Ilian corrected. Sergeant Thorne has the combat experience and the ground level perspective. I have the command authority and the augmented capabilities. Together, we'd make an effective team. And you'd need Draketh, Ivar added. If we encounter Tau technology or personnel, having someone who can speak their language and understand their culture would be invaluable. You want to take a Xenos prisoner on a covert Imperial operation into uncharted space? Vale said flatly. I want to take a valuable asset who's proven his worth and his willingness to cooperate. Ivar corrected. Agent Lyssa pushed away from the wall, her movements fluid and controlled. This is highly irregular. The Inquisition would need to approve any operation involving Xenos cooperation. Then, get approval, Ivar said bluntly. Or don't tell them until it's done. Because, Captain, with all due respect, every day we wait is another day this enemy grows stronger. Another ship that gets attacked. Another 100 soldiers who die fighting an enemy they don't understand. He met Vale's eyes, veteran to veteran. You served with the Cadian 7th. You know what it's like to stand on the wall when the darkness comes. You know that sometimes you have to take risks. You have to trust your gut and your soldiers and make the hard call. For a long moment, Vale simply stared at him. Then she smiled. A real smile that transformed her weathered face. You remind me of someone I served with on Medusa 5. Bastard got us into more trouble than I can count. But he also saved our lives a dozen times over by refusing to follow doctrine when doctrine was going to get us killed. She stood, straightening her uniform. All right, Sergeant. You've convinced me. Agent Lissa, I'm authorizing this operation under my discretionary powers as station commander. You can file whatever reports you need to file, but this is happening. The inquisitorial agent was silent for a moment. Then she nodded. Understood, Captain. For the record, I'm recommending to my superiors that this operation be retroactively sanctioned. Sergeant Thorne's logic is sound, and the potential intelligence gain outweighs the risks. But, and here her mask turned toward Ivar, if this goes wrong, the consequences will be severe. Understood, Ivar said, feeling a weight settle onto his shoulders, even as excitement began to build in his chest. Vale moved to her desk, already pulling up manifests and personnel files. You'll take the Corvette. Stalwart Faith. She's fast, well armed, and has the range for an extended operation. I'll assign you a crew of volunteers. No one goes into wild space without knowing the risks. How soon can we launch? Ilian asked. 72 hours. That gives you time to review intelligence, brief your crew, and make sure everyone understands what they're getting into. Vale looked up at them. This isn't a glory mission. It's a scout operation. You find the enemy base, you gather intelligence, and you get out. No heroics. Ivar thought about faith, steel, and will, about standing on walls when darkness came, about refusing to give up even when logic said you should. No heroics, he agreed, knowing full well that once they were out there, anything could happen. Dismissed, Vale said. And Sergeant, don't make me regret this. I'll do my best, Captain. As they left the office, Ilian clapped him on the shoulder with an augmented hand that would have knocked over a normal man. You just volunteered us for a suicide mission. I hope you realize that. It's not suicide, Ivar said. It's faith. Faith in what? In humanity, in our ability to adapt and overcome, in the idea that sometimes the right thing to do is also the craziest thing to do. He grinned, feeling more alive than he had in years. Besides, you heard the captain. No heroics. How bad could it be? Ilian's augmented laugh echoed through the corridor. Famous last words, veteran. Famous last words. The next 72. Hours passed in a blur of preparation. Ivar reviewed every piece of intelligence the station had on the uncharted systems, memorizing stellar geography and known hazards. He met with the crew of the Stalwart Faith, explaining the mission in broad terms and making sure each volunteer understood the risks. To his surprise, he had more volunteers than positions. Word had spread about the Endeavor's fate, and there was no shortage of Imperial soldiers eager to strike back. He also spent time with Draketh. The Tau scientist had been given quarters in a secure section of the station, comfortable, but clearly monitored. When Ivar arrived for their first meeting, he found the alien surrounded by data slates and hololithic projections, completely absorbed in his work. Knock, knock, Ivar said, announcing his presence in the doorway. Draketh looked up, his large eyes widening slightly in what might have been surprise. Sergeant Thorne, I did not expect to see you again so soon. We need to talk. Ivar entered, studying the projections. They showed complex mathematical models he didn't fully understand, but the underlying patterns were familiar. Warp signatures, energy fluctuations, the telltale signs of chaos corruption. You've been busy. Captain Vale granted me access to the station's sensor logs. I've been analyzing every warp disturbance in this sector for the past year. Draketh gestured at the displays. The pattern is even more pronounced than I initially thought. Someone is definitely coordinating these activities, which is why we're going after them. Ivar watched the alien's reaction carefully. And you're coming with us. Draketh froze, his hands hovering over the hololithic controls. What? You're coming with us, Ivar repeated. Into wild space to find whoever's behind this. We need your expertise, your knowledge of Tau technology and culture. We need you. Sergeant, I am a prisoner. I have no say in... You're not a prisoner anymore. Ivar cut him off. You're a volunteer. At least, that's what the official records will say. Captain Vale is bending every regulation she can to make this happen. But ultimately, the choice is yours. You can stay here in comfortable quarters, or you can come with us and help stop whatever's brewing out there. The Tau was silent for a long moment, his alien face unreadable. Then he spoke, his voice quiet. Why are you doing this? Why are you trusting... me? Because you've earned it, Ivar said simply. You could have let us die on the Endeavor. You didn't. You could have led us to Tau space and claimed a hero's welcome. You didn't. You've demonstrated faith and cooperation, the steel of your knowledge, and the will to do what's right. That makes you one of us, as far as I'm concerned. One of us, Draketh repeated softly. A human phrase? An inclusive designation? Yet I am not human. No, Ivar agreed. But you're someone who fights for what's right. Someone who refuses to give up even when the odds are against you. Someone who believes there's something worth saving in this galaxy. That's what makes you one of us. Not your species, but your choices. Dreketh turned back to the hololithic displays, studying them with an intensity that suggested he was seeing more than just data. My people would consider this collaboration heresy. The greater good does not typically extend to working with those who actively oppose it. And my people would consider you a Xenos threat to be eliminated on sight, Ivar countered. But here we are, having a civilized conversation about saving the galaxy. Funny how circumstances change perspectives. A sound emerged from Draketh that might have been laughter. Indeed. Very well, Sergeant Thorne. I accept your offer. I will accompany your mission and provide whatever assistance I can. Though I must warn you, my combat capabilities are minimal. I'm a scientist, not a warrior. We've got plenty of warriors, Ivar said. What we need is someone who can think, someone who can analyze and adapt and figure out things the rest of us are too busy shooting to notice. That's you. A scientist surrounded by soldiers, Draketh mused. This should be interesting. Interesting is one word for it. Ivar moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. When we're out there, when things get difficult, and they will get difficult, I need you to trust me. Trust that I'm not going to abandon you, not going to treat you as expendable. You're part of the crew now, and I protect my crew. Even Xenos crew? Especially Xenos crew who've proven themselves. Ivar met the alien's eyes. Faith, steel, and will. Those aren't just human virtues. They're universal. And I have faith that you understand that. The Stalwart Faith was a beautiful ship, in the way that weapons of war can be beautiful. 300 meters of armored hull, bristling with lance batteries and torpedo tubes, driven by plasma engines that could accelerate it to velocities that made space itself seem to bend. She was old. Her keel had been laid during the Gothic War, more than 3 centuries ago, but she'd been maintained with the loving care that Imperial Navy crews gave to ships that had proven themselves in battle. Ivar stood in the hangar bay, watching as the crew loaded supplies and ran final checks on systems. 37 souls would be making this journey, just enough to run the ship efficiently without stretching resources too thin. Each one had volunteered, understanding the risks. Each one had their own reasons for going. Beside him, Ilian reviewed tactical displays on a data slate, his augmented fingers moving with mechanical precision. Our route will take us through the Scorn Nebula, around the gravity well of a dead star system, and into the target region. Total journey time, 2 weeks, assuming. Optimal warp conditions, and if warp conditions aren't optimal, then we could arrive in 2 months, 2 years, or never. Ilian's tone was matter-of-fact. Such is the joy of warp travel. Comforting. I aim to please. A figure approached from the ship's boarding ramp, Draketh, looking distinctly uncomfortable in the modified void suit that had been hastily adapted to his physiology. The Tau scientist moved with uncertain steps, clearly unused to the gravity plating of Imperial vessels. Is it always this heavy? He asked as he reached them. The gravity? Ivar suppressed a smile. That's standard 1G. What do Tau ships run at? Approximately 0.87 of your standard. More efficient for our physiology. Dreketh adjusted the suit's collar. I will adapt, though I suspect I will be quite tired by the time we arrive. We've got stims for that, Ilian said, though I'd recommend you avoid them unless absolutely necessary. Imperial. Pharmaceuticals weren't exactly designed for Tau biology. A wise precaution. They boarded together, Ivar leading the way through the ship's corridors. The Stalwart Faith had been built for function rather than comfort. Every surface was bare metal or worn plasteel, decorated only by holy symbols and prayers to the machine god. The air smelled of oil and recycled oxygen, with an underlying scent of ozone from the electrical systems. The bridge was a cramped space dominated by control stations and displays. The ship's captain, a grizzled woman named Octavia Rend, who'd served in the Imperial Navy for 4 decades, stood at the command throne, overseeing preparations. Sergeant Thorne, she acknowledged as they entered, we'll be ready to launch in 20 minutes. Warp engines are hot, systems green across the board. Excellent. Ivar moved to what would be his station during the voyage, a tactical display that showed the ship's position and surrounding space. Captain, this is Draketh. He'll be serving as our Xenos expert and technical consultant. Captain Wren turned her weathered gaze on the Tau, studying him with the intensity of someone evaluating a new weapon. Can you operate Tau communication systems? Yes, Captain. Can you identify Tau ship signatures and military formations? Yes, Captain. Can you translate Tau language in real time? I believe so, yes. Wren nodded. Then welcome aboard, Xenos. Try not to touch. Anything you're not supposed to, and we'll get along fine. It was, Ivar reflected, probably the warmest welcome a Tau had ever received on an Imperial warship. The launch was smooth, the Stalwart Faith, disengaging from the station and moving into open space with practiced ease. They cleared the gravity well of Vigilus Secundus, building speed as they moved toward the system's edge, and the Mandeville Point where they could safely enter the warp. Ivar stood at his station, watching the crew. Stars streamed past on the displays. Beside him, Ilian was running final checks on their tactical systems. On the far side of the bridge, Draketh sat at a hastily installed console reviewing the intelligence they'd gathered. Entering warp translation in 60 seconds, the navigator's voice echoed through the ship, tinged with the slightly unnatural quality that all navigators possessed. Ivar felt his stomach tighten. Warp travel never got easier, no matter how many times you experienced it. The sensation of reality shifting, of passing through a realm where physical laws were more suggestions than rules, where demons pressed against the Geller field like predators circling prey. It was enough to drive lesser minds mad. All hands, prepare for warp translation. Captain Wren's voice was calm, authoritative. 30 seconds. Ivar's hand found the Aquila pendant he wore beneath his armor, fingers tracing its familiar shape. A prayer formed on his lips, words memorized in childhood and repeated 1,000 times since. 15 seconds. The Emperor protects. In his name, we venture into darkness. May his light guide us through the storm. Translation in 3, 2, 1. Reality twisted. The ship shuddered, groaning as it pushed through the barrier between real space and the immaterium. The viewports, reinforced and blessed though they were, showed glimpses of things that shouldn't exist, colors without names, shapes without definition, entities that existed in too many dimensions to comprehend. Then they were through, and the warp surrounded them. Ivar let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Around the bridge the crew were doing the same, relief visible on every face. Warp translation was always a moment of terror, no matter how experienced you were. Translation successful, the navigator confirmed. Geller field stable. Estimated time to destination, 14 days, assuming stable. Currents. Well, Ilian said quietly, no turning back now. Was there ever? Ivar asked. Fair point. The first few days passed without incident. The crew fell into the routine of void travel, where watches were set, systems were monitored, prayers were offered to the ship's machine spirit and the Emperor's protection. Draketh spent most of his time analyzing data, occasionally emerging to ask questions about Imperial sensor readings or tactical protocols. On the 5th day, Ivar found the Tau scientist in the ship's small observation deck, a cramped space with a single reinforced viewport showing the churning madness of the warp beyond the Geller field. Draketh stood before it, his blue face illuminated by impossible lights. Careful, Ivar said, approaching slowly. Stare too long at the warp and it starts staring back. I can believe it. Draketh didn't look away. Your people travel through this regularly? Willingly? We don't have much choice. It's the only way to cross the galaxy in any reasonable time frame. Ivar joined him at the viewport, keeping his own gaze carefully unfocused. The warp is dangerous, but it's also necessary, kind of like faith itself, I suppose. How so? Faith requires you to believe in something you can't fully understand or control. The warp is the same way. It's a realm of pure emotion and thought, where reality is malleable and nothing is certain. But without it, humanity would be trapped on individual worlds, isolated and vulnerable. So we learn to navigate it, to harness it, even though it terrifies us. Draketh turned to look at him. Is that how you see faith? As something terrifying but necessary? Sometimes. Ivar considered his words carefully. Faith isn't always comfortable. It asks you to trust in things beyond your control, to accept that there are forces in the universe greater than yourself. That's scary, but it's also liberating, in a way, because it means you're not alone. It means that even in the darkest moments, there's something, someone, watching over you. The Emperor, the machine god, the spirits of your ancestors. Whatever form it takes, the core is the same. You're part of something larger than yourself, and that connection gives you strength. Draketh was quiet for a moment. The greater good serves a similar purpose for my people. It is the belief that by working together, by subordinating individual desires to collective benefit, we can achieve things impossible for individuals alone. Not so different from faith, Ivar observed, just expressed in different terms. Perhaps? The Tau turned back to the viewport. But the greater good is rational. It can be explained, quantified, optimized. Your faith, it defies logic. It requires you to believe despite evidence, to hope despite probability. That's what makes it powerful. Ivar's voice was soft. Logic can only take you so far. When you're facing impossible odds, when every calculation says you're going to die, logic tells you to give up. But faith says to keep fighting. Faith says that miracles can happen, that the impossible can become possible if you refuse to surrender. And you've seen these miracles. Ivar thought back across 4 decades of warfare. Battles won against impossible odds. Soldiers surviving wounds that should have killed them. Last stands that somehow turned into victories. Yes, he said, simply. I've seen miracles. Not often, and never predictably, but enough times to know they're real, enough times to keep faith. The ship hummed around them, pushing through the warp toward their destination. Outside, impossible shapes danced and writhed, pressing against the Geller field with malevolent intelligence. "I do not know if I can embrace your faith," Dryketh said finally, "but I begin to understand why it matters to you, why it shapes your people in ways mine cannot. Comprehend." "Understanding is enough," Ivar replied. "Faith isn't something you can force or fake. It's something that either exists or doesn't. But understanding it, respecting it, that's all anyone can ask." They stood together in silence, human and alien, watching the warp flow past. It was, Ivar reflected, a scene that would have been unthinkable just weeks ago. Yet here they were, bound by circumstance and mutual respect, preparing to face an enemy that threatened them both. Faith, steel, and will. 3 pillars holding up the edifice of survival. And maybe, just maybe, those pillars were strong enough to support more than just humanity. On the 10th day, everything went wrong. The ship lurched violently, alarms screaming through every corridor. Ivar was thrown against a bulkhead, his armor taking the impact that would have broken bones. Around him, crew members scrambled for stations, training overriding panic. "Bridge!" Ivar barked into his Vox as he ran. "Status? Warp disturbance." Captain Wren's voice was tight with controlled fear. "Something's tracking us." Ivar burst onto the bridge to chaos. Every display showed warnings, sensor readings spiking into dangerous territory. Through the viewport, the warp itself seemed to have taken on a malevolent focus. Currents that had been random now moved with purpose, converging on the ship. "Geller field holding," the chief engineer reported. "But it's under unprecedented stress. Something's testing it, probing for weaknesses." Demons? Ilian had arrived seconds behind Ivar, his augmented systems showing no sign of the impact. "Unknown." The navigator's voice crackled over the Vox, strained almost beyond recognition. "This isn't normal warp predation. This is intelligent, coordinated." Dryketh appeared at Ivar's shoulder, his blue face pale even in the red emergency lighting. "The patterns, they match what I observed on the Endeavor. Someone is using the warp as a weapon." "Can you track the source?" Ivar demanded. "Possibly, if you can give me access to your navigator's inputs." "Do it," Captain Wren ordered. "Tech Priest, hook our Xenos friend into the navigation arrays. Don't ask questions, just do it." The Tech Priest looked scandalized but complied, muttering prayers to the machine god as he routed connections to Dryketh's console. The Tau scientist's fingers flew across the controls, his large eyes darting between displays. "There," he said after a moment that felt like an eternity. "The disturbance is originating from these coordinates. It's not far from our destination." Ivar and Ilian exchanged looks. "They know we're coming." "Worse?" Dryketh said grimly. "They're trying to stop us from arriving. These warp currents are attempting to push us off course, to scatter us across the immaterium. If we maintain current heading, the Geller field will fail within the hour." "Options?" Captain Rende snapped. "We could alter course, try to avoid the disturbance," the navigator suggested. "But that would add weeks to our journey, maybe months." "Or we could run the gauntlet," Ilian said quietly. "Push through the disturbance, risk everything on reaching our destination before the field fails." The bridge fell silent. Every eye turned to Ivar, though he had no formal command authority. Somehow, without anyone saying it aloud, this had become his mission, his call to make. He thought about faith, the belief that they served a purpose greater than themselves. About steel, the tools and weapons that gave faith physical form. About will, the refusal to surrender even when logic said you should. "We push through," he said. "Whatever's at our destination, they're scared enough of us to try stopping us before we arrive. That means we're on the right track. That means we need to keep going." Captain Wren nodded sharply. "You heard the man. Navigator, plot us the straightest course through this storm. Engineering? Give me everything the engines can provide. All hands, battle stations. If demons want to board us, they'll find we're not easy prey." The stalwart Faith accelerated, her plasma engines screaming in protest as they pushed beyond safe limits. Around them, the warp convulsed like a wounded animal, currents lashing at the ship with hatred that felt personal. Ivar moved to the tactical station, pulling up every defensive system the ship possessed. Beside him, Ilian was doing the same, his augmented fingers dancing across controls. On the other side of the bridge, Dryketh worked frantically, analyzing patterns and calling out warnings as the disturbance intensified. "Contact," the sensor officer shouted. Multiple entities manifesting within detection range. The displays lit up with hostile signatures. Dozens of them, hundreds, more than should be possible, even in the warp's madness. They were converging on the ship from all directions, shapes that defied description. Entities that existed partly in real space and partly in nightmare. "Lance batteries, fire at will," Captain Wren commanded. "All gun crews, full defensive spread. The ship shuddered as her weapons opened fire, las beams and plasma bolts lancing into the swirling chaos. Some shots found targets, entities screaming in voices that made ears bleed as they were ripped apart. But for every one destroyed, 2 more appeared. Geller Field at 70%, the engineer warned. 65, 60. How long until we're through? Ivar asked. 12 minutes, Draketh reported. If we maintain current speed and heading. If the field holds, Ilian added grimly. 12 minutes. An eternity in combat, a heartbeat in the grand scheme of things. Ivar watched the entities swarm closer, watched his crew fight with the discipline and courage that made the Imperial Guard legendary, watched the field strength continue to drop. 55%, 50, 45. Breaches in sectors 7 and 12, someone screamed. Demons are getting through. Security teams, repel borders. Ivar grabbed his Laskerbine and sprinted for the door, Ilian right behind him. Captain, we're on it. The corridors had become a war zone. Where demons had breached the field, reality itself seemed to warp and twist. Crew members fought desperately with whatever weapons they could grab. Laser guns, wrenches, blessed blades, even their bare hands when nothing else remained. Ivar rounded a corner and came face to face with something that might once have been human. It was twisted now, reformed by the warp into a nightmare of too many limbs and eyes that wept fire. It reached for him with claws that could unmake flesh. He shot it. 3 times, 4 times. Until it fell apart into ash and screaming. Sector 7 secured, he reported into the Vox. Moving to Sector 12, Ilian's power sword blazed to life, its blessed blade burning away corruption wherever it touched. The commander fought with augmented speed and strength, each strike precise and lethal. Behind him, a squad of security personnel formed a firing line, las bolts punching through demonic flesh. But they were losing ground. For every daemon destroyed, the breach allowed more through. The Geller Field was failing, reality coming apart at the seams, and if they didn't do something soon, the entire ship would be consumed. Ivar's mind raced, searching for solutions. They couldn't repair the breaches from inside. The demons would just keep coming. They couldn't strengthen the field without shutting down the engines, which would leave them stranded in the warp. Unless... Bridge! Ivar shouted into the Vox. I need to speak to Draketh. Now. A moment later, the Tau's voice crackled through. Sergeant Thorne? The disturbance attacking us, the one you tracked, can you pinpoint its exact source? The specific coordinates? Yes, possibly. Why? Because we're going to kill it. Ivar was already running back to the bridge, trusting Ilian to hold the corridor. Captain, I need torpedo tubes armed and targeted on whatever Draketh finds. He burst onto the bridge to find Captain Rend already nodding. Thinking what I'm thinking? If something's using the warp as a weapon against us, that means it has a physical anchor point. Some kind of device or ritual or entity that's channeling the power. We destroy that anchor, the attack stops. And if you're wrong, then we die slightly faster than we would otherwise. Ivar moved to Draketh's console. Do you have the coordinates? The Tau's hands were shaking as he worked. Yes. Here. But Sergeant, the amount of energy radiating from this point, it's massive. A single torpedo won't... Who said anything about a single torpedo? Ivar looked at Captain Rend. How many do we have? 12 tubes, 6 torpedoes per tube. The captain's smile was grim. You want to throw all 72 at this bastard? Every single one. I like your style, Sergeant. Rend turned to her weapons officer. You heard the man. Load every tube, arm every warhead, and prepare for full salvo. Make the target coordinates point-blank range. Point-blank? Draketh's voice rose in alarm. Captain, that's suicide. The detonation will reach us at the exact moment we translate back into real space. Ivar interrupted. If we time it right, the blast will be contained in the warp and we'll be safely in real space before it catches up. Probably. Probably? I'm open to better suggestions if you have one. The Tau opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. Finally, he slumped in his seat. You humans are completely insane. We prefer courageously determined, Ilian said, having rejoined them on the bridge. He was covered in blood and ichor, his power sword still smoldering. Sector 12 is holding, but barely. Then let's end this. Captain Wren stood at her command throne, every inch the Imperial officer. All hands, brace for multiple impacts. Gunnery, you may fire when ready. Firing in 3, 2, 1. Torpedoes away. The ship shuddered as 72 torpedoes launched simultaneously, their plasma drives igniting the moment they cleared the tubes. They streaked through the warp like comets, converging on the coordinates Draketh had identified. 20 seconds to detonation, the weapons officer called out. 18, 15. Navigator, Rend barked. Translation point. Now. Translating. The navigator's scream was barely human. Hold on. Reality convulsed. The torpedoes detonated. The stalwart Faith punched through the barrier between warp and real space, and for one eternal instant, 3 things happened simultaneously. The ship existed in both realms at once. The torpedo detonation reached them through the warp, and every soul aboard felt the universe hold its breath. Then they were through. Alarms screamed. Damage reports flooded the Vox. The ship was trailing debris and venting atmosphere from a dozen breaches. But they were in real space. They were alive. And behind them, the warp roiled with the dying echo of whatever had been attacking them. Status! Captain Wren's voice was hoarse but steady. Geller field offline. Warp drive damaged but functional. Conventional engines at 60% capacity. Hull breaches on multiple decks. Casualties? Counting now. Ivar leaned against his console, suddenly aware of how much his body hurt. Every muscle ached, his head pounded, and he was pretty sure at least 2 ribs were cracked. Around him, the bridge crew were in similar condition. Bruised, bleeding, but alive. Casualties, 17 dead, 26 wounded, 8 of those seriously. The damage control officer finally reported. But the ship is space-worthy. We'll live. Sensors, Wren said. Where are we? The officer worked his controls for a moment. Dead center of the target region, Captain. And we're not alone. The main display flickered to life, showing what lay ahead. A space station. It was massive. Kilometers across, a twisted amalgamation of Tau technology and something else, something wrong. Sleek blue and white structures merged with Gothic architecture in ways that shouldn't work, powered by energy signatures that combined plasma reactors with warp-touched corruption. And surrounding it, dozens of ships, Tau cruisers and Imperial vessels flying side by side, bearing marks of both empires and neither. A fleet that should be impossible. Emperor's throne, someone whispered. Draketh was staring at the display, his large eyes wider than Ivar had ever seen them. This is not possible. The Tau would never ally with chaos. Never. It violates every principle of the greater good. Someone forgot to tell them that. Elian said grimly. Captain Wren was already issuing orders. Silence the ship. All non-essential systems offline. Make us look like dead debris. They might not have spotted us yet. Too late for that, the sensor officer said. 3 ships are breaking formation. Heading this way. Ivar moved to the tactical display, studying the incoming vessels. 2 Tau frigates and 1 Imperial corvette, all bearing the same mismatched design as the station. They were accelerating hard. Weapons? Hot. Time to engagement? 4 minutes. 4 minutes to decide their fate. 4 minutes to figure out how to fight their way past an entire fleet. 4 minutes to remember what faith, steel, and will really meant. Ivar looked around the bridge, at Captain Wren, standing tall despite her injuries, at Ilian, already calculating tactical options with his augmented mind, at Draketh, terrified but determined, at the crew, exhausted but ready for whatever came next. All right, he said, quietly. Let's show them what happens when you corner a wounded animal. Captain Wren smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who'd spent 40 years in the void, who'd survived 100 battles, who'd learned that sometimes the only way out was through. Weapons, she said, her voice carrying through the bridge. Arm everything we have left. Engineering, give me every bit of power the engines can spare. Helm, plot an attack vector through that fleet. Captain, the helm officer's voice cracked, there are over 30 enemy vessels between us and any chance of escape. The math doesn't account for faith, Wren interrupted. For steel. For the will of humans who refuse to die quietly. Now plot that vector, or I'll find someone who will. Yes, Captain. Ivar felt something warm spreading through his chest, pushing back the pain and exhaustion. This was it. This was what it meant to be human. Not the size of your fleet or the power of your weapons, but the refusal to give up even when every logical calculation said you were doomed. The incoming ships were 2 minutes out now. Draketh, Ivar said. You said the station is powered by both Tau plasma reactors and warp-touched energy? Yes. The signature is unmistakable. Somehow they're using both technologies simultaneously. Which means if we can destabilize one system, it might cascade into the other. Ivar's mind was racing now, pieces falling into place. Tau plasma systems are vulnerable to electromagnetic interference. And warp corruption is unstable by nature. We create enough disruption, the entire station might tear itself apart. Ilian finished. He looked at Ivar. You want to blow up the station while we're flying toward it? Not blow up, destabilize, create enough chaos that their fleet has to pull back to protect it. Then we slip away in the confusion. That's a terrible plan. Do you have a better one? Ilian thought for a moment, then shrugged. No, let's do it. 1 minute to engagement. Captain, Ivar said, I need our remaining torpedoes armed with electromagnetic warheads, and I need them launched at the station the moment those ships are in range. Wren didn't ask questions. Make it happen. The enemy ships were visible now in the main viewport, growing larger as they closed the distance. Their weapons charged, targeting locks activating, ready to reduce the stalwart Faith to atoms. 30 seconds. Ivar's hand found his Aquila pendant again. The metal was warm from contact with his skin, worn smooth by decades of touching. He didn't pray aloud. There was no need. The Emperor knew what was in his heart. 20 seconds. Around the bridge, the crew prepared. Some prayed. Some checked weapons. Some simply stood at their stations, ready to do their duty until the end. 10 seconds. 5. The enemy ships opened fire. Now, Wren shouted. The stalwart Faith launched her remaining torpedoes, not at the enemy ships, but past them, toward the massive station beyond. Simultaneously, her lance batteries opened up in a defensive spread, intercepting some of the incoming fire, accepting hits from the rest. The ship shuddered under the impact of plasma bolts and last fire. Armor plating vaporized, systems sparked and died. But the torpedoes were away, racing toward their target. Evasive maneuvers, Wren commanded. Get us through that gap. The ship dove between the attacking vessels, her engines screaming in protest. Returned fire tore through space where they'd been seconds before. The enemy ships tried to turn to track them, but momentum and the chaos of combat made precision impossible. The torpedoes struck the station. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the electromagnetic pulse washed over the structure, disrupting systems, causing feedback loops in the plasma reactors. And where those reactors touched the warp-corrupted sections, reality screamed. The station convulsed, massive explosions blooming across its surface. The energy signatures, Tau and chaos, technology and sorcery, clashed in ways they were never meant to, creating feedback loops that spiraled out of control. The structure began to tear itself apart, sections venting into space, others folding in on themselves in impossible geometries. And the fleet, seeing their base under threat, broke formation. Ships that had been moving to intercept the stalwart Faith instead turned back, rushing to contain the disaster. Helm! Through the gap, maximum speed. The stalwart Faith shot through the confusion, her damaged engines pushing beyond their limits. Behind them, the station continued to disintegrate, and the fleet dissolved into chaos, trying to save what they could. Clear of the fleet, the sensor officer reported. We're going to make it. But Ivar wasn't celebrating yet. He was watching the display, watching the station collapse, watching ships scatter in all directions. And he was thinking about what they'd found here, about what it meant, an alliance between Tau and chaos, a fleet that combined the technology of both, a station where the material and immaterial met and merged. This was just the beginning, just one piece of something larger, something more terrible than they'd imagined. Captain, he said quietly, we need to get this intelligence back to Imperial. Command. Whatever's happening here, it's bigger than one station or one fleet. Wren nodded grimly. Agreed. Navigator, plot us a course to the nearest astropathic relay. We need to get word out about this. What about the station? Ilian asked. Should we try to get closer, gather more intelligence while we have the chance? Ivar looked at their battered ship, their depleted weapons, their exhausted crew. Looked at the fleet still scrambling to contain the catastrophe they'd created. Looked at Draketh, who seemed shaken to his core by what they'd witnessed. No, he said finally. We've done enough. We found what we were looking for. We survived to tell the tale. That's victory enough. Wise, Wren said. Helm, get us out of here. Best possible speed. The stalwart Faith turned away from the chaos and carnage, her wounded engines carrying her toward safety. Behind them, the impossible station continued its death throes, and an enemy fleet learned that humanity, no matter how outnumbered or outgunned, would not go quietly. The journey back took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of makeshift repairs, of tending to the wounded, of watching the void and praying that no one followed them. 3 weeks of processing what they'd seen, trying to understand the implications. Ivar spent much of that time in the observation deck, staring out at the stars, and thinking about faith, steel, and will, about how those 3 pillars had kept them alive when all logic said they should die, about how, in the end, humanity's greatest weapon wasn't technology or numbers, but the simple refusal to surrender. On the 18th day, Draketh found him there. Sergeant Thorne, the Tau said, his voice quieter than usual. May I speak with you? Of course. Draketh settled into a seat, his posture suggesting exhaustion. I have been thinking about what we witnessed, about that station, about the collaboration between my people and forces of chaos. And I am disturbed, deeply disturbed. The greater good should make such an alliance impossible. We seek order, progress, logic. Chaos represents everything we oppose. Yet there it was, undeniable. Tau technology merged with warp corruption. Tau ships flying alongside heretics. Sometimes, Ivar said carefully, the universe is more complicated than our beliefs allow for. Indeed. Dreketh was silent for a moment. I asked you about Earth's religion, about faith, steel, and will, and you explained them to me with such conviction that I began to understand their power. But now I must ask, what happens when faith is betrayed? When the steel you build is turned against you? When your will alone is not enough? Eva turned to look at the alien, seeing genuine anguish in those large eyes. You're asking how to keep believing when everything falls apart. Yes. That's when faith matters most. Eva chose his words carefully. Faith isn't about believing when everything is easy. It's about believing when everything is hard. When the evidence says you should give up, when logic says you're doomed, when even your own people turn against your ideals. That's when faith becomes essential. But how? How do you maintain that faith? By remembering why you had it in the first place. Ivar gestured at the stars beyond the viewport. You believe in the greater good because you've seen what cooperation can achieve, because you've witnessed the power of working together toward a common goal. That truth doesn't change just because some of your people have been corrupted or led astray. But the Imperium has traitors too. Ivar interrupted gently. The Horus heresy, the age of apostasy, countless smaller betrayals throughout our history. Half the Imperium's own forces turned against the Emperor during the darkest days. Does that invalidate the Emperor's sacrifice? Does that mean faith in humanity is worthless? No, Draketh admitted. No, Ivar agreed, because faith isn't about perfection. It's about purpose. It's about recognizing that we're all flawed, all capable of falling, but choosing to strive for something better anyway. The Tau was quiet for a long time, processing this. Finally, he spoke again. During the battle, when we were surrounded and dying, when logic said we had no chance, you never faltered. You fought as if victory was certain, even when it clearly wasn't. I asked Commander Kor about this afterward, and he told me something interesting. What was that? He said that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite fear. That faith isn't certainty. It's hope despite doubt. That will isn't superhuman strength. It's the refusal to give up, even when weakness threatens to overwhelm you. Ivar smiled. Ilyan is wiser than he looks. Is he right? Is that really what makes you human? That ability to hope against hope, to fight against impossible odds, to refuse surrender even when defeat seems certain? Yes, Ivar said simply. That's exactly what makes us human. Not our species, but our spirit. Our insistence that the universe doesn't get to decide our fate, we do. That we have a say in how our story ends, even if that ending is death. Draketh stood, moving to the viewport. His reflection in the glass was ghostly, overlaying the stars beyond. I am changed by what I have witnessed. By the station, yes, but also by you and your crew. By the way you faced death with such faith, Ivar supplied. Steel, will. Yes, those three things. The Tau turned back to face him. When we return, when I am inevitably questioned about my time aboard this ship, I will tell them the truth, that humanity is both terrifying and inspiring, that you are capable of both great cruelty and great courage, that you believe in things that defy logic, yet those beliefs give you strength beyond what logic can provide. And will they believe you? I don't know, but I will tell them anyway, because it is true, because you have earned my respect, my admiration, and perhaps something that the Tau do not have a word for, but which I think you would call faith. Ivar felt something warm in his chest, something that had nothing to do with combat adrenaline or fear. You honor us, Draketh, and for what it's worth, you've earned the same from us. You're brave, capable, and principled. You adapted to our ways, without abandoning your own. That's as impressive as any combat victory. And then perhaps, the Tau said slowly, there is hope for our peoples. Not as enemies, not even really as allies, but as colleagues in survival, partners in resisting the darkness. Maybe. Ivar extended his hand, a human gesture of friendship and respect. It's not much, but it's a start. Draketh looked at the offered hand, then at Ivar's face, then back at the hand. Slowly, carefully, he reached out and clasped it in his own three-fingered grip. Faith that cooperation is possible, the Tau said. Steel to defend that possibility, Ivar continued. And will to never give up on it, they finished together. They emerged from the warp at the edge of the Vigilus system, battered but alive. The station's sensor arrays picked them up immediately, and within minutes they were being hailed. Captain Rend took the communication personally. This is Captain Octavia Rend of the Stalwart Faith, returning from authorized reconnaissance mission, requesting priority docking and immediate debriefing with Station Command. Stalwart Faith, this is Vigilus Control. We read significant damage to your vessel. Do you require emergency assistance? Negative, Control. We're spaceworthy. But we have critical intelligence regarding Chaos-Xenos collaboration that requires immediate command attention. There was a pause. Then Captain Vale's voice came over the channel, tight with concern. Rend, this is Vale. Bring your ship in. And bring Sergeant Thorne and Commander Core to my office immediately upon docking. Understood, Captain. Stalwart Faith out. The docking procedure was somber. The crew filed off the ship in silence, many bearing visible wounds, all bearing the invisible scars of what they'd witnessed. Medical teams rushed forward to treat the injured. Tech priests swarmed over the damaged vessel, already planning repairs that would take months. Ivar, Ilian, and Draketh made their way through familiar corridors toward Vale's office. Around them, station personnel stared at their injuries, their exhausted faces, and most of all at the Tau scientist walking freely among Imperial officers. Vale was waiting in her office, along with Agent Lisa and several other officers Ivar didn't recognize. Their ranks and insignia marked them as high-level Imperial command, the kind of people who made strategic decisions that affected entire sectors. Report, Vale said without preamble. For the next hour, Ivar and Ilian laid out everything they'd witnessed. The ambush by warp forces during their journey, the impossible station where Tau and Chaos technology merged, the fleet of hybrid vessels, the catastrophic destabilization they'd triggered to escape. Draketh added technical details, explaining the energy signatures and technological implications with the precision of a trained scientist. His voice shook when describing his own people's involvement, but he didn't flinch from the truth. When they finished, the room was silent. Finally, one of the senior officers spoke, a Lord General whose name badge read Tibris. This is the most significant intelligence we've received in decades. A coordinated alliance between Xenos and heretics represents a threat unlike anything the Imperium has faced since the heresy itself. Agreed, Vale said, which is why this information must reach Terra itself. The High Lords need to know what's emerging in this sector. And what of the Xenos? Agent Lissa's masked face turned toward Draketh. He has proven valuable, but he is still Xenos. Protocol demands... Protocol, Ivar interrupted, surprising himself with his boldness, demanded that we die on the Endeavor. Protocol demanded we turn back when the warp attacked us. Protocol demanded we avoid the enemy fleet rather than engage. We're only standing here because we ignored Protocol when necessary. Sergeant, Lord General Tibris's voice was dangerous. Are you suggesting we abandon Imperial doctrine? No, sir. I'm suggesting we adapt it. The Emperor taught us to be strong, but also to be wise, to use every resource available to ensure humanity's survival. Draketh is a resource. He's proven his worth a dozen times over. Executing him now would be wasteful and counterproductive. He's Xenos. He's someone who risked everything to help us survive. Ilian stepped forward, his augmented voice giving his words weight. He's someone who shared critical intelligence that may save countless Imperial lives. He's someone who, despite having every reason to betray us, chose cooperation instead. That's worth something. Vale was watching the exchange with careful eyes. What are you proposing, Sergeant? Ivar took a breath. This was it. This was the moment where he either secured Draketh's future or damned them both. I'm proposing that Draketh be granted conditional sanctuary within the Imperium, that he be allowed to continue his research under Imperial supervision, providing intelligence and analysis that could help us understand and counter this new threat. In exchange, we provide him protection and resources. You want us to harbor a Xenos? Tibris said flatly. I want us to be smart enough to recognize an asset when we have one. Ivar met the general's gaze without flinching. Sir, with all due respect, the galaxy is changing. We're facing enemies that don't play by the old rules. If we're going to survive, we need to adapt. We need to be willing to work with unlikely allies when necessity demands it. Dangerous thinking. Maybe. But is it more dangerous than ignoring intelligence that could save millions of lives? More dangerous than executing someone who's proven themselves loyal? More dangerous than letting pride and prejudice blind us to opportunities? The room was silent. Ivar could feel the weight of multiple gazes on him, measuring, judging, calculating. He'd gone further than a sergeant had any right to go, had challenged authority in ways that could earn him censure or worse. But he'd also spoken the truth. And sometimes, truth was all you had. Captain Vale stood, moving to the viewport. She stared out at the stars for a long moment before speaking. Lord General Tibris, I'm recommending that we accept Sergeant Thorne's proposal. Porvory Draketh will be granted provisional sanctuary, assigned to our intelligence division and placed under continuous monitoring. If he proves valuable, the arrangement continues. If he proves treacherous, he'll be dealt with accordingly. Captain, this is my station, General, and on my station I make the calls that I believe best serve the Imperium. Draketh stays. Tibris's face was unreadable. Then slowly he nodded. Very well. But understand, Captain, if this goes wrong, the consequences will fall on all of you. Understood, Vale said. Dismissed. As they filed out of the office, Ivar felt the tension drain from his shoulders. It wasn't perfect. Draketh would still be watched, still be suspect, still be treated as something less than fully trusted. But he'd be alive. He'd have a chance to prove himself further, and that was all anyone could ask. In the corridor, Draketh stopped, turning to face Ivar and Ilian. "Thank you," he said simply. "Both of you. You risked much to defend me." "You earned it," Ilian replied. "Besides, we need someone who can explain all that technical data without making my augmented brain overheat. And someone who challenges us to be better," Ivar added. "Someone who reminds us that our enemies aren't always who we think they are, and our allies can come from unexpected places. Faith," Draketh said softly, "that others can surprise us. Steel in the form of knowledge and cooperation. Will to keep fighting for what's right, even when the entire galaxy seems to disagree." Ivar smiled. "You're learning. I have good teachers." 3 months later, Ivar stood once again in Captain Vale's office. The station had changed in subtle ways since the stalwart Faith's return. More security, more patrols, more awareness of the threat lurking in the darkness beyond known space. Intelligence had been flowing in from across the sector, painting a picture that was both encouraging and terrifying. The hybrid station they'd destroyed had been just one of several. The alliance between corrupted Tau auxiliaries and Chaos forces was growing, coordinated by entities that remained frustratingly unknown. But the Imperium was adapting. New protocols had been implemented, task forces had been formed, and at the center of the intelligence effort was an unlikely trio: a grizzled sergeant, an augmented commander, and a Tau scientist who'd chosen cooperation over isolation. "Sergeant Thorne," Vale said as he entered, "I have new orders for you." Ivar wasn't surprised. He'd known this reprieve couldn't last forever. "Where am I being assigned, Captain?" "Nowhere. You're staying here." Vale's smile was slight but genuine. "The High Lords have reviewed your report and decided that the threat you identified requires a specialized response. They're authorizing the formation of a new unit, one designed specifically to investigate and counter Chaos-Xenos collaboration." She passed him a data slate. "You'll be leading it. Commander Kor will serve as your second, and Draketh will provide technical and cultural expertise. You'll have access to whatever resources you need and authority to operate with minimal oversight." Ivar stared at the slate, not quite believing what he was reading. "Captain, I'm just a sergeant. I don't have the rank or experience to—" "You have exactly the experience we need. You faced this enemy and survived. You've demonstrated the ability to think creatively and adapt to impossible situations. And most importantly, you've shown the wisdom to recognize allies in unlikely places." Vale stood, moving around her desk. "The Imperium needs more officers like you, Sergeant. Officers who understand that faith, steel, and will aren't just slogans, but principles to live by." Thank you, Captain. I won't let you down." "I know you won't." She extended her hand. "Good luck, Veteran Sergeant Thorne. The galaxy is watching." As Ivar left the office, he found Ilian and Draketh waiting in the corridor. They fell into step beside him, 3 unlikely companions bound by shared experience and mutual respect. "So," Ilian said, "I hear we have a new mission." "We have a new purpose," Ivar corrected. "A reason to keep fighting, keep adapting, keep refusing to give up. Faith that our efforts matter," Draketh said. "Steel to give that faith physical form," Ilian continued, "and will to never surrender, no matter what the galaxies throws at us," Ivar finished. They walked together through the station's corridors, past soldiers and crew who stopped to salute or simply stare, past viewports showing the infinite stars, past memorials to those who'd fallen defending humanity's future. And as they walked, Ivar thought about a conversation he'd had weeks ago about Earth's religion and what humanity believed, about the 3 pillars that had kept his species alive for 30,000 years: faith, steel, and will. Not unique to humanity after all, but universal truths that any species could embrace. Truths that had brought together a human veteran, an augmented commander, and a Tau scientist into something greater than the sum of their parts. The galaxy was vast and dark, full of horrors that defied comprehension, but it was also full of possibility, of hope, of the chance that even the most unlikely alliances could flourish if given the right foundation. Behind them, the universe continued its eternal dance of creation and destruction. Ahead, unknown challenges waited in the darkness, but they would face those challenges together, bound by principles that transcended species and culture, faith that their cause was just, steel to defend what they believed in, and the will to never, ever give up. Because that was what it meant to stand against the darkness, not the absence of fear, but action despite it, not certainty, but hope despite doubt, not superhuman strength, but the refusal to surrender even when weakness threatened to overwhelm. That was the Emperor's true gift to humanity, not divine protection or guaranteed victory, but the example of an unbreakable spirit. A spirit that said the universe didn't get to decide your fate, that you had a say in how your story ended, that as long as you drew breath, there was still hope. And hope Ivar had learned was the most powerful weapon of all. The three of them walked on toward whatever future awaited, together. And somewhere, in the vast darkness between stars, enemies watched and calculated and prepared. But they didn't yet understand what they were facing. They were facing humanity. And humanity, augmented by steel, driven by will, sustained by faith, would not go quietly into the night. Not today, not ever. For the Emperor protects. And sometimes he protects through the most unlikely instruments.
Angels fall.